Tonight, we drift into the lowlands of mainland Southeast Asia, where monsoon clouds gather above shining wetlands and warm wind moves softly through the trees. Here, long before Angkor rose in stone, earth and water shaped every path of life. Settle in now, get comfortable, and let the day fall away as we enter a quieter world of forests, rivers, and patient beginnings. On Told History, we share calm, true stories from the past, told slowly to help you rest while history unfolds around you. If you enjoy these quiet journeys, please like and subscribe to support the channel and future stories. And now, as the night deepens, let us return to the humid plains and shadowed woodlands, where the Khmer world was gently taking shape. Chapter 1. Where the forest meets stone. Before the towers of Angkor lifted above the trees, this land was already rich with motion, memory, and seasonal change. Broad rivers carried silt across the plains, rain filled hollows and streams, and forests pressed close around scattered communities. In this world, people learned to live with water, not as an obstacle but as a steady companion shaping food, travel, and power. Mainland Southeast Asia was never still for long. The sky itself seemed to breathe in great cycles, with dry months giving way to monsoon rains, then returning once more to heat and brightness. These rhythms guided planting, fishing, movement, and rest. For those living in the Khmer lands, the changing seasons were not background details. They were the structure around which daily life, survival, and hope quietly turned. In lowlands that would one day cradle Angkor, water gathered everywhere. It lingered in marshes, spread across floodplains, and shone in channels that widened with the rains. Villages rose near reliable sources of water, and fields depended on the careful reading of the land. To understand this region is to begin with its wetness, not empty or wild, but fertile, shifting, and full of possibility. Rice lay at the heart of this world. In fields softened by seasonal floods and human labour, rice connected family life to the larger movement of climate and soil. The work was repetitive, demanding, and deeply familiar, repeated year after year beneath changing skies. As communities grew more skilled in managing water and harvests, they also laid the quiet foundations for greater organisation, cooperation, and political strength in the centuries ahead. The forests surrounding these lowlands were dense and alive, filled with towering trees, tangled roots, birdsong, insects, and hidden pathways. They offered wood, fruit, resin, animals, and sacred mystery, but they also limited movement and concealed distance. To live near the forest was to know both abundance and uncertainty. It stood beside the cultivated world as neighbour, shelter, and threshold, never entirely separate from human life. Rivers linked the Khmer world to places far beyond its wetlands and fields. Boats could move people, goods, and ideas along natural routes that crossed the region. Through waterways, local communities encountered traders, beliefs, and political influences flowing between India, China, and the lands in between. Even before Angkor became a great centre, these channels helped weave the region into a larger fabric of exchange and imagination. Even before Angkor became a great centre, these channels helped weave the region into a larger early centres of power in mainland Southeast Asia did not appear all at once, nor were they fixed in the way later capitals might seem. Authority often gathered gradually around fertile land, ritual importance, trade access, and the ability to organise labour. In the Khmer region, leadership emerged from this same landscape. Power was something rooted in the earth and water, but also in belief, ceremony, and remembered ancestry. Chinese sources describe a polity called Funan in the lower Mekong region during the early centuries of the first millennium. Historians still debate its exact nature, but it appears to have been an important centre of trade and authority. Later, other political formations developed across the region. These early states remind us that Angkor did not rise from emptiness. It inherited older networks, customs, and experiments in organised rule. As centuries passed, influences from South Asia became increasingly visible in mainland Southeast Asia, especially through religion, language, art, and kingship. Sanskrit inscriptions, Hindu ideas, and later forms of Buddhism entered local worlds and were adapted in distinctive ways. This was not simple imitation. Khmer rulers and communities reshaped outside influences to fit their own landscapes and traditions, creating something rooted locally yet connected to a wider sacred horizon. Temples in this earlier world were often built from perishable materials, and many traces have vanished into the climate that once surrounded them. Wood decayed, thatch disappeared, and earthwork softened back into the ground. Yet inscriptions, archaeological remains, and later stone monuments help historians glimpse a long period of development before Angkor's grand age. Beneath the famous towers lay generations of quieter building, worship, and political experimentation. For the Khmer world, land was never merely dry ground waiting to be occupied. It was a living surface shaped by flood, drought, vegetation, and human effort. Slight rises could become settlements. Wet depressions could feed ponds or fields. The ability to notice subtle differences in terrain mattered deeply. Over time, this intimate knowledge of the landscape would support large systems of cultivation and urban planning on a remarkable scale. Water management did not begin suddenly with Angkor's greatest kings. Long before the vast reservoirs and channels of the imperial age, communities were already observing rainfall, storing water, redirecting flow, and adjusting to seasonal extremes. These practices emerged through experience rather than invention in a single moment. They belonged to generations who watched the sky, studied the ground, and slowly learned how to live within a demanding, dangerous environment. The spiritual life of the region also grew from this close relationship with place. Hills, forests, rivers, and ancestors could all carry sacred meaning. Later Hindu and Buddhist ideas entered a world already attentive to invisible presence and ritual obligation. In this blending of local reverence and imported cosmology, rulers found powerful symbols. A kingdom could be imagined not only as territory, but as a sacred order mirroring the universe itself. If we listen carefully to this early landscape, we can almost hear a future city forming long before its walls and towers appeared. In the rustle of reeds, in the digging of channels, in the planting of rice, and in the speech of local courts, small choices accumulated. Civilizations are not born in a single triumph. They gather quietly, season by season, until one day their shape becomes unmistakable. The area around future Angkor offered unusual advantages. Nearby lay fertile plains, access to water from the Tonle Sap region, and room for expansion across a broad lowland zone. This setting could support dense populations when carefully managed. It also allowed rulers to stage ceremonies, command labour, and build enduring monuments. Geography alone did not create Angkor, but it offered a stage of extraordinary promise for ambitious kings. The Tonle Sap, the Great Lake of Cambodia, played a central role in this larger environmental system. Its size changes dramatically with the seasons, swelling during the monsoon as river flow reverses and waters spread outward. This rare pattern nourished fish populations and enriched surrounding lands. For communities connected to it, the lake was more than a body of water. It was a breathing source of food, movement, and resilience. Picture the Khmer world before Angkor's full rise. Imagine not one city, but a mosaic of settlements, shrines, fields, waterways, and courts, all linked unevenly across the land. Some places held more influence than others, yet the region remained dynamic rather than fixed. Loyalties shifted, rulers competed, and communities adapted. Out of this layered and changing world, a more concentrated form of power would eventually begin to emerge. That emergence was never only political. It depended on labour measured in hands, seasons, and memory. Earth had to be moved, fields tended, offerings prepared, roads traced, and alliances maintained. Behind every later temple stood countless unnamed lives whose work shaped the conditions for greatness. In a sleepier telling of history, it is easy to focus on kings alone, but the deeper rhythm belongs equally to ordinary people and land. By the end of this early period, the Khmer-speaking regions were already participating in a sophisticated world of ritual authority and agricultural production. Leaders understood that control of land and water could sustain both populations and prestige. Religious symbolism helped frame rule as sacred, while practical management anchored it in daily necessity. These twin forces, belief and environment, would become inseparable in the story of Angkor's extraordinary ascent. Soon, names of rulers will begin to step forward more clearly from the historical record, and the outlines of a kingdom will sharpen. But before we follow them, it helps to linger here a little longer. In the softer world, the myth helps to linger here a little longer, in the softer world that made them possible. The wetlands, forests, and monsoon skies were not simply scenery before history began. They were active participants in everything that followed across the Khmer centuries. So as the night carries us onward, hold this image gently in mind. A land half water, half earth, with green horizons stretching beneath heavy clouds in warm light after rain. In scattered clearings, people plant, pray, trade, and govern, never fully apart from the forest around them. This is the threshold of Angkor, not yet stone and grandeur, but the living ground from which both would rise. In the next part of our journey, the story will move closer to the moment when Khmer kingship takes on a new and defining form. The landscape will remain with us, because it never stops shaping events, even when monuments begin to dominate the view. For now, rest in this earlier world, calm, humid, and full of slow beginnings, where the future empire sleeps quietly beneath trees and rain. Chapter 2. Jayavarman and the beginning of Angkor. In the early 9th century, the lands of the Khmer world were not yet gathered around one famous city. Power rested in shifting courts, local rulers, and sacred places spread across the region. Into this landscape came Jayavarman II, a king remembered not for creating Angkor in a single moment, but for beginning a slower, steadier process of union, ceremony, and royal ambition. Chapter 2. Jayavarman and the beginning of Angkor. Tradition connects Jayavarman II with the year 802, a date often treated as a beginning point in Khmer history. Historians use it carefully because the story comes through later inscriptions and memory. Even so, that remembered moment matters. It marks the idea of a ruler claiming a broader authority, one that reached beyond a single court and aimed to bind different lands beneath a more unified kingship. Chapter 2. Jayavarman and the beginning of Angkor. Before Angkor became a vast ceremonial centre, kingship in the region moved through landscapes of rivers, rice fields, shrines, and forest edges. Rule depended on relationships as much as force. A king needed loyalty from local elites, support from religious specialists, and access to fertile land. The shaping of power was gradual, woven through travel, ritual, negotiation, and the steady placing of authority into both earth. Chapter 2. Jayavarman and the beginning of Angkor. Jayavarman II is associated with a ceremony on Phnom Kulen, a highland area northeast of the later Angkor heartland. According to later inscriptions, this was where a ritual affirmed his status as a universal ruler, independent and sacred. The details remain partly veiled by time, yet the meaning is clear enough. Royal power was being expressed not only through command, but through cosmology, ceremony, and divine legitimacy. Chapter 2. Jayavarman and the beginning of Angkor. In Khmer political thought, sacred authority was not separate from governance. A ruler stood within a world where the spiritual and the practical touched constantly. Temples, ceremonies, and offerings did more than honour the gods. They helped organise loyalty, define rank, and anchor power in visible form. Through ritual, a king could appear not merely strong, but necessary. A centre around which both land and people. Chapter 2. Jayavarman and the beginning of Angkor. This does not mean that one proclamation suddenly produced an empire. The early Khmer state took shape over time. Courts shifted location. New shrines were established. Water, roads, fields and settlements were drawn into closer relationships with royal plans. What later generations remembered as a founding was a lived experience, a careful accumulation. Authority thickened slowly, like morning mist settling over low ground and revealing a pattern. Chapter 2. Jayavarman and the beginning of Angkor. Around the ruler stood advisors, priests, officials, craftsmen and labourers, each playing a part in the making of a political centre. Kingship was never a solitary performance. It relied on hands that built sanctuaries, minds that recorded grants, and communities that sustained agriculture. The beginning of Angkor can therefore be imagined not as one dramatic scene, but as many coordinated acts, repeated across seasons. Chapter 2. Jayavarman and the beginning of Angkor. The landscape itself mattered deeply. Early Khmer rulers did not choose empty ground and declare a capital into existence. They worked within inhabited environments shaped by waterways, soils, routes of movement, and older sacred sites. A royal centre gained strength when it could connect these features into a meaningful whole. Geography, devotion, and administration gradually leaned toward one another, allowing a more lasting. Chapter 2. Jayavarman and the beginning of Angkor. Inscriptions from later reigns look back to Jayavarman II with reverence, presenting him as a foundational figure. Such texts were political as well as historical, and they helped later kings explain their own authority through an honoured past. Still, their memory reflects something real off. His reign became a useful point of origin because it represented consolidation, the gathering of ritual prestige, territorial ambition, and Chapter 2. Jayavarman and the beginning of Angkor. The idea of a political centre is easy to imagine as stone towers rising all at once, yet the earliest stages were quieter. The court might gather near a shrine. Land might be assigned to support ritual. Paths of travel might begin to focus on one seat of authority. Slowly, habits formed. People learned where petitions were heard, where ceremonies were held, and where the king's presence most fully shaped the world. Chapter 2. Jayavarman and the beginning of Angkor. Royal ceremony gave visible rhythm to this emerging order. Processions, offerings, recitations, and formal acts of dedication made power legible to those who witnessed them. These events were not empty display. They translated abstract rule into sound, gesture, and memory. In a world where legitimacy needed to be felt as much as declared, ceremony allowed kingship to settle into the imagination of the realm with gentle but lasting force. Chapter 2. Jayavarman and the beginning of Angkor. Sacred mountains held special meaning in South and Southeast Asian political thought, and high places could evoke divine order. Phnom Kulen, linked in tradition to Jayavarman II, fit naturally into this symbolic landscape. From elevated ground, kingship could be imagined in cosmic terms, yet below the symbolism lay practical realities. A ruler still needed fields, labour, communication. Chapter 2. Jayavarman and the beginning of Angkor. What emerged in this period was not only a stronger king, but a stronger pattern of rule. Land grants supported temples. Temples reinforced authority. Authority helped organise labour and resources. Resources then sustained further building and ceremony. In this quiet cycle, the foundations of Angkor were laid, not as a sudden marvel, but as an increasingly coordinated world where spiritual order and political ambition strengthened one another. Chapter 2. Jayavarman and the beginning of Angkor. To speak of unification is also to remember diversity. The Khmer realm included different local traditions, landscapes, and power holders. A central ruler could not simply erase them. Instead, early kingship worked by linking them into broader frameworks of loyalty and ritual. This was one reason sacred language mattered so much. It offered a shared vocabulary through which local places could belong to something larger, without losing all memory of themselves. Chapter 2. Jayavarman and the beginning of Angkor. As courts gathered around royal ambition, material traces began to accumulate. Shrines marked devotion. Managed lands supported elites and temples. Settlements expanded in relation to administrative needs. None of this yet resembled the vast Angkor of later centuries, but the direction had been set. A centre was forming through repeated decisions about where to build, where to worship, where to store resources, and where authority. Chapter 2. Jayavarman and the beginning of Angkor. Historians often describe Jayavarman II as the founder of the Khmer Empire, though careful language is important here. Founder can suggest a clean beginning, while the evidence points to continuity as well as change. Earlier polities, older beliefs, and existing communities all shaped what followed. His significance lies in the way his reign came to symbolize a new concentration of power. remembered as the first firm step toward Angkor's later greatness. Chapter 2. Jayavarman and the beginning of Angkor. In the centuries that followed, Khmer kings would raise monumental temples and organize immense landscapes of water and settlement. Those achievements did not emerge from nowhere. They rested on earlier experiments in rule, devotion, and spatial order. Jayavarman II stands near the beginning of that longer arc. His memory endures because later magnificence needed an origin, and his reign offered one rooted in ceremony. Chapter 2. Jayavarman and the beginning of Angkor. The word Angkor itself would later come to mean city or capital, but at this early stage the story is less about a finished metropolis than about concentration. Power was condensing. Sacred authority was being formalized. Administrative habits were beginning to cluster around royal space. What mattered most was not instant scale, but direction, the steady movement toward a center capable of holding both symbolic and practical command. Chapter 2. Jayavarman and the beginning of Angkor. If we listen closely to this early chapter, we hear not the noise of sudden conquest, but the quieter sounds of formation. Priests preparing ritual space, messengers moving between courts, farmers sustaining the grain base of authority, builders setting markers of permanence into the soil. Through such ordinary and sacred labours, the foundations of empire were assembled. Through such ordinary and sacred labours. Chapter 2. Jayavarman and the beginning of Angkor. The relationship between ruler and landscape would remain one of Angkor's defining features. Early on, this meant more than choosing a residence. It meant shaping an environment that reflected order, obligation, and sacred meaning. Land was measured, assigned, and cultivated in ways that supported ritual institutions. Over time, these patterns helped create a world where political authority could be read directly in fields, roads, shrines, and gathering places. Chapter 2. Jayavarman and the beginning of Angkor. We should picture this beginning with patience. Not a lonely king standing before an empty plain, but a layered realm slowly learning where its centre would be. Memory later polished the story into a clearer origin, as royal histories often do. Yet beneath the polished version lies a more human process. Negotiation, planning, reverence, labour, and the gradual confidence that a durable Khmer kingship could truly. Chapter 2. Jayavarman and the beginning of Angkor. By linking royal ambition to sacred ceremony, Jayavarman II's remembered reign gave later generations a language for legitimacy. Kings could inherit more than territory. They could inherit a model of rule in which divine order and earthly administration worked together. This legacy mattered deeply. It shaped how power was imagined, displayed, and justified, and it prepared the ground for the temple-centered civilization that would later astonish the world. Chapter 2. Jayavarman and the beginning of Angkor. So the beginning of Angkor was not a sudden unveiling, but a gathering. Courts gathered, ritual gathered, resources gathered, meanings gathered around the figure of the king. In that quiet accumulation, a centre became possible. The later towers and reservoirs, the carved galleries and immense ceremonial spaces, all depended on this earlier work of connection, joining land, belief, authority. Chapter 2. Jayavarman and the beginning of Angkor. As this chapter comes to rest, we are left at the threshold rather than the summit. The great monuments still lie in the future. For now, what matters is the beginning. A remembered king, a sacred claim, a landscape being organized, and a political center slowly taking shape. From these patient foundations, Angkor would grow over generations into one of the most remarkable Chapter 3. Reservoirs beneath the open sky. In Angkor, water was not a background presence but a patient foundation beneath daily life. Across the plain, great reservoirs held the monsoon sky in still, shining sheets, while canals carried movement through fields and settlements. To understand this empire fully, we must listen not only to its temples, but to the quiet logic of stored rain, guided earth, and careful human effort. Chapter 3. Reservoirs beneath the open sky. During the rainy season, clouds gathered over the Cambodian plain and released immense volumes of water. For any kingdom rooted here, survival depended on knowing when that abundance would arrive, how long it would last, and where it would go. Angkor answered these questions through deliberate planning, shaping the land so the monsoon could become not chaos, but nourishment spread gently across the year. Chapter 3. Reservoirs beneath the open sky. Among the most striking features of Angkor were the bares, vast man-made reservoirs that stretched across the landscape like inland seas. Their surfaces reflected morning light, drifting cloud, and distant temple towers. To a visitor, they may have seemed serene and effortless, yet each wide basin represented surveying, digging, embankment building, and the organised labour of many hands working patiently over long periods. Chapter 3. Reservoirs beneath the open sky. The East Bare, created in the 10th century, and the West Bare, built later and even larger, remain among the clearest signs of Angkorian hydraulic ambition. These were not small ponds, but enormous engineered spaces. Their scale suggests a kingdom capable of mobilising labour, coordinating design, and maintaining earthworks over time. They remind us that Angkor was built as much with channels and banks as with carved sandstone. Chapter 3. Reservoirs beneath the open sky. Scholars continue to discuss exactly how every part of Angkor's water system functioned in different periods. Some elements likely served multiple purposes at once, practical and symbolic together. Reservoirs could store water, support agriculture, shape settlement, and also express royal order over the landscape. In Angkor, usefulness and meaning were often intertwined, so a body of water transmits ideas of balance. Chapter 3. Reservoirs beneath the open sky. Canals linked reservoirs, moats, fields, and communities into a connected system. Some channels ran straight with striking confidence, while others adapted to the subtle shape of the ground. Water moved through this network according to season, slope, and human direction. The landscape became something read and adjusted, never entirely fixed. Year after year, the system required attention, because earth settles, banks erode, and channels slowly gather silt. Chapter 3. Reservoirs beneath the open sky. Embankments were essential to this watery world. Raised walls of earth helped contain stored water, define boundaries, and guide seasonal flow. They were practical structures, yet they also changed how people experienced space. Walking along a bank, one might see rice fields on one side and a broad, shining reservoir on the other. These edges gave form to Angkor's environment, turning open plain into a managed and inhabited design. Chapter 3. Reservoirs beneath the open sky. Rice cultivation lay at the heart of the empire's endurance. Wet rice agriculture depends on timing, water depth, labour, and local knowledge carried across generations. In the lands around Angkor, controlled access to water could improve stability and support dense populations. Fields needed preparation, bunds, transplanting, weeding, and harvest. Behind every bowl of rice stood an entire rhythm of seasonal work, repeated with patience beneath sun and rain. Chapter 3. Reservoirs beneath the open sky. It is tempting to imagine Angkor chiefly through its sacred towers, but many lives were shaped more directly by fields, dikes, ponds, and canals. Farmers, labourers, boatmen, and local officials all participated in the empire's hydraulic life. Water had to be observed and discussed. Banks had to be repaired. Channels had to remain open. The grandeur of kings rested, in part, on the ordinary Pacific. Chapter 3. Reservoirs beneath the open sky. The monsoon brought both gift and challenge. Heavy rains could replenish reservoirs and moisten fields, yet too much water in the wrong place might damage embankments or flood settled land. Too little, later in the cycle, could leave crops vulnerable. Angkor's water management was therefore not a single act of construction, but an ongoing conversation with climate, soil, and terrain. A patient effort to soften uncertainty with Chapter 3. Reservoirs beneath the open sky. In quiet hours, the reservoirs must have seemed almost dreamlike. Wind brushed across the surface. Light stretched and shifted. Birds crossed the margins where reeds met open water. Yet beneath that calm appearance was a deeply worked landscape. Thousands of decisions, from where to cut a channel to how high to raise a bank, helped produce the stillness. Even tranquility here was something constructed through long and careful. Chapter 3. Reservoirs beneath the open sky. Angkor's hydraulic landscape also supported urban life beyond farming alone. Water was needed for households, for transport in some areas, for ritual spaces, and for the functioning of a large capital spread over a broad region. Roads and waterways together shaped movement. Settlements were not isolated points around temples, but parts of an expansive inhabited environment where infrastructure connected sacred centres to the practical needs of daily existence. Chapter 3. Reservoirs beneath the open sky. Modern archaeological research, including aerial surveys and remote sensing, has helped reveal how extensive this managed landscape truly was. Beneath forest cover and around famous monuments, patterns of canals, ponds, roads and embanked fields have come into view. These findings encourage us to see Angkor not as a cluster of isolated masterpieces, but as a vast urban network. The temples were brilliant peaks within a Chapter 3. Reservoirs beneath the open sky. The labour behind these works invites quiet reflection. Earth had to be dug without modern machinery, carried, shaped and compacted. Organisation mattered as much as strength. Leaders needed to direct projects, communities needed to supply workers, and maintenance had to continue after construction ended. A reservoir was never only a hole filled with water. It was a social achievement, held in place by cooperation. Chapter 3. Reservoirs beneath the open sky. Water management also carried political meaning. A ruler associated with prosperity, order, and abundant harvest could strengthen legitimacy through visible control of the landscape. Large hydraulic works demonstrated capacity. They showed that authority could command labour and reshape the environment for collective use. In this sense, a barrage was not only infrastructure, it was also a statement that power could gather the reins, steady the field. Chapter 3. Reservoirs beneath the open sky. Still, Angkor's system should not be imagined as perfectly uniform or permanently stable. It likely changed across centuries as rulers, populations, and environmental conditions shifted. New channels were added, old ones modified, and local arrangements adapted to circumstance. A living hydraulic landscape evolves. Its strength lies partly in flexibility, yet that same complexity can make it difficult to maintain. What appears timeless from afar. Chapter 3. Reservoirs beneath the open sky. The relationship between temple and water was especially striking. Moats encircled major sacred compounds, and reservoirs extended the sense that water belonged to both earthly necessity and spiritual imagination. Reflections of towers in still surfaces invited contemplation. The same environment that fed rice fields also framed ritual experience. At Angkor, engineering and belief were not neatly separated. They met in the landscape. Chapter 3. Reservoirs beneath the open sky. Imagine the slow routine of those who live within this system. At dawn, paths along embankments begin to stir. Water levels are noticed almost without words. A channel is clear here, clogged there. Seedlings need care. A bank needs repair after rain. Such tasks may seem humble beside royal monuments, yet they form the empire's true daily pulse. Civilization often survives through maintenance, more than from moments of dramatic. Chapter 3. Reservoirs beneath the open sky. Because reliable harvest can support specialists, administrators, artisans and religious institutions, water helps sustain more than food alone. It underwrote complexity. A large population could gather around Angkor because the surrounding landscape was organized to capture and distribute resources with unusual effectiveness. The empire's ceremonial splendor therefore rested on material foundations, behind carved galleries. Chapter 3. Reservoirs beneath the open sky. Historians and archaeologists do not always agree on every detail of how Angkor's hydraulic system operated, especially across different centuries. Some emphasize large-scale storage, others stress local adaptation and diversified management. What remains clear is that water was central to adaptation and diversified management. In precise practice. The wider pattern interacted in precise practice. The wider pattern is unmistakable. Chapter 3. Reservoirs beneath the open sky. If we stand quietly beside one of these immense reservoirs, the scene invites a different kind of historical understanding. The surface appears simple, almost empty, but it contains the memory of planning, labour, weather, and need. Water stores time. It gathers one season for use in another. In that sense, Angkor's reservoirs were not only spaces in the landscape, they were tools for carrying abundance forward into uncertainty. Chapter 3. Reservoirs beneath the open sky. To call Angkor a hydraulic city is not to reduce it, but to widen our view of its brilliance. The empire's achievement was not limited to temples rising from stone platforms. It also included subtle gradients, channels cut through earth, and reservoirs placed with foresight. This was intelligence expressed territorially. The land itself became organized knowledge, a broad worked surface where environment, governance, and human survival. Chapter 3. Reservoirs beneath the open sky. Over generations, children would have grown up with these waters as part of the ordinary world. Reservoirs, ponds, canals and flooded fields were not marvels to them each day, but familiar realities. Yet familiarity can hide greatness. When a system works, it often disappears into routine. Only later do we step back and recognise the scale of coordination required. Angkor's water world everyday life, an extraordinary civilizational accomplishment. Chapter 3. Reservoirs beneath the open sky. As night settles over our telling, the vast basins of Angkor lie calm beneath the open sky, holding reflected stars where monsoon waters once gathered with purpose. Here, empire was sustained not only by devotion or conquest, but by storage, timing, and care. The next turns in Angkor's story will reveal how such greatness could endure for centuries, and how even the most intricate landscapes must eventually face change. And Chapter 4. Cities of brick, laterite and sandstone. Angkor did not rise as a single finished wonder. It grew slowly across generations, as kings, priests and craftsmen added roads, walls, towers and shrines. Each new reign left marks upon the land, not by erasing the old, but by building beside it. In this patient unfolding, the city became a vast sacred landscape. Chapter 4. Cities of brick, laterite and sandstone. In the early centuries of Angkor, builders often worked with brick, shaping compact sanctuaries that rose warm and red above the plain. Brick was practical and familiar, yet it also carried grace. Careful hands laid each course in measured order, yet it also carried grace. Careful hands laid each course in measured order, creating elegant towers for devotion. Even before the grand sandstone monuments of later times, these earlier temples gave the king. Chapter 4. Cities of brick, laterite and sandstone. Alongside brick came laterite, a dense reddish stone cut from the earth itself. When freshly quarried, it could be shaped more easily, then hardened as it met the air. Builders used it for strong enclosures, terraces and hidden structural cores. It was not always the surface seen by worshippers, yet it quietly held weight and form. In Angkor, even the less visible materials played essential parts in the life of monuments. Chapter 4. Cities of brick, laterite and sandstone. Sandstone brought another possibility. Smoother, paler and more suited to carving, it allowed sculptors to fill temple surfaces with gods, guardians, dancers and flowering designs. Blocks had to be quarried, transported and fitted with remarkable precision. The labour was immense, yet the result felt light and serene. On these stone faces, the Khmer world expressed devotion not only through mass and height, but through detail, softness and sacred imagination. Chapter 4. Cities of brick, laterite and sandstone. To move through Angkor was to pass through an expanding city of connections. Roads linked temples, reservoirs, villages and royal spaces across a wide urban landscape. Causeways stretched forward in calm lines, guiding feet and processions toward enclosed sanctuaries. These paths were more than practical routes. They shaped experience, preparing the body and mind for entry. At Angkor, movement itself became part of architecture, measured. Chapter 4. Cities of brick, laterite and sandstone. Enclosures gave Angkor its layered character. A visitor might cross a moat, pass through a gateway and enter one courtyard, only to find another wall beyond, then another throw beyond, then another threshold still. These spaces narrowed attention and deepened ceremony. Each boundary marked a gradual passage from the ordinary world towards something more concentrated and holy. Rather than one open monument, Angkor often revealed itself in stages, like a quiet unfolding. Chapter 4. Cities of brick, laterite and sandstone. Temple towers rose as vertical signs within this broad horizontal world. Some were modest, others commanding, but all lifted the eye upward. In Khmer's sacred architecture, height carried meaning. Towers suggested the cosmic mountain, the elevated home of divine presence. Yet they were never separate from the ground below. Steps, courtyards, galleries and walls led gently toward them, so that ascent became both physical. Chapter 4. Cities of brick, laterite and sandstone. Workshops must have hummed with steady effort. Stone cutters, carvers, transport workers and planners all contributed to the making of a temple. Though the names of most remain unknown, their skill survives in every joint and surface. Someone had to smooth the block, set the angle, carve the lintel and align the doorway. Angkor was built not only by kings and vision, but by countless practiced hands moving patiently. D-labor. Chapter 4. Cities of brick, laterite and sandstone. In these workshops, raw materials slowly changed character. Rough stone became a polished threshold. A plain block turned into a guardian figure or a curling ornament of leaves and petals. The transformation was not hurried. It required repetition, memory, and confidence learned over years. As tools struck the surface again and again, architecture emerged from discipline. The temples of Angkor still seem calm to for. Cities of brick, laterite and sandstone. Building also expressed legitimacy. Khmer kings did not rule through force alone. They anchored authority in ritual, patronage and visible acts of creation. A new temple could honor a deity, commemorate an ancestor, or present a ruler as guardian of cosmic order. Architecture made power tangible. It rose above the plain as a statement that this reign had meaning, blessing, and permanence. Chapter 4. Cities of brick, laterite and sandstone. Yet each king inherited a landscape already full of memory. Earlier sanctuaries stood nearby, roads already crossed the plain, and older foundations shaped what could come next. So Angkor expanded by accumulation. New monuments answered old ones. Fresh walls enclosed ancient spaces. A later generation might honor the past even as it redirected attention. This gave the city its layered beauty, not a single plan imposed at once. Chapter 4. Cities of brick, laterite and sandstone. As the centuries passed, Angkor became one of the largest urban complexes of the pre-industrial world. Its monuments are the most visible remains, yet they belong to a much wider environment of habitation, waterworks, fields, roads and shrines. Temples did not float alone in the jungle. They stood within a live landscape shaped by engineering and seasonal knowledge. The sacred and the practical were intertwined, each helping. Chapter 4. Cities of brick, laterite and sandstone. Within temple precincts, space could feel both ordered and intimate. Courtyards open to the sky, galleries held shade, and carved doorways framed transitions from one chamber to another. Light shifted gently across stone through the day. A sanctuary might hold intense ritual meaning, yet the path toward unfolded with calm deliberation. Angkor's architecture did not simply impress through size. It guided perception, teaching visitors. Chapter 4. Cities of brick, laterite and sandstone. The choice of material also shaped atmosphere. Brick carried warmth, laterite gave strength and depth. Sandstone offered refinement and subtle line. Together, they allowed builders to combine utility with beauty. Some structures relied on hidden cores and finished surfaces, practical support beneath decorative brilliance. This marriage of function and elegance is part of Angkor's quiet genius. The temples endure because they were imagined artistically. Chapter 4. Cities of brick, laterite and sandstone. Causeways often prepared the heart for arrival. Long and straight, bordered at times by balustrades, they carried processions toward gateways and towers with deliberate ceremony. The body moved forward while the monument slowly gathered presence. Distance became emotional as well as physical. By the time a visitor reached the inner courts, the journey had already begun its work. Angkor understood that sacred experience could be built into the approach, one step at a time. Chapter 4. Cities of brick, laterite and sandstone. Not every structure aimed at overwhelming scale. Smaller shrines, libraries and subsidiary buildings helped complete the temple world. They created balance, supported ritual and enriched the geometry of the whole. In Angkor, meaning often emerged through relationship, tower to courtyard, wall to gate, sanctuary to water. Even modest buildings mattered. They contributed to a carefully arranged field in which architecture, for life, harmony. Chapter 4. Cities of brick, laterite and sandstone. Water was never far from this architectural imagination. Moats reflected walls and towers, while reservoirs and channels sustained the larger urban world around them. The presence of water changed how stone was seen and approached. Reflections doubled forms, softened edges, and approached. Reflections doubled forms, softened edges, and added stillness to the monumental setting. At Angkor, masonry and water belonged to the same vision. One gave solidity. Chapter 4. Cities of brick, laterite, and sandstone. Over time, styles changed. Decorative programs shifted, plans grew more elaborate, and the scale of ambition could widen dramatically under powerful rulers. Yet continuity remained. Builders returned again and again to familiar principles of enclosure, elevation, alignment, and symbolic order. This balance between innovation and tradition helped Angkor remain coherent, even as it expanded. The city evolved to 4 cities of brick, laterite and sandstone. It is tempting to imagine Angkor as a collection of isolated masterpieces, each complete in itself. But the deeper truth is gentler and more complex. The monuments belong to a shared urban fabric, one shaped over centuries by labour, ceremony, memory and adaptation. A temple was part of a wider pattern of roads, water, residences and fields. To understand Angkor fully is to see not one monument, but an unfolding civilization in stone. Chapter 4. Cities of brick, laterite and sandstone. The forest that surrounds Angkor today can make the temples feel remote, yet in their own time many stood within active, inhabited settings. People worked nearby, travelled the roads, tended fields and participated in ceremonies that animated these spaces. Stone was not separate from life. It stood among Jur was real, but so was its everydayness, a monumental world sustained by ordinary continuity. The city's grandeur was real. Chapter 4. Cities of brick, laterite and sandstone. When we picture craftsmen at work, it helps to imagine patience above all. Blocks had to be aligned, surfaces refined, motifs repeated with disciplined care. Such labour asked for strength, but also judgment and restraint. One mistake could disturb the harmony of an entire surface. The serenity of Angkor's monuments was earned slowly, through exacting effort. Their calm appearance today still carries of those long hours when form emerged from attention. To 4. Cities of brick, laterite and sandstone. Kings may have sponsored the great projects, but meaning was shared across many levels of society. Priests, artisans, officials, labourers and surrounding communities all played roles in sustaining sacred places. A temple was at once a royal statement and a social achievement. This does not lessen the authority of kingship. Instead, it shows how power at Angkor was materialised collectively, through coordinated work that bound devotion, hierarchy and craftsmanship into lasting architecture. In Chapter 4. Cities of brick, laterite and sandstone. As we drift through this city of brick, laterite and sandstone, the monuments begin to feel less like frozen relics and more like moments in a very long process. Every wall suggests an earlier foundation, every tower a future response. Angkor was never static. It was an evolving sacred capital, shaped by succession and memory. Its greatness lay not only in individual structures, but in the patient continuity that linked one reign to the next. Chapter 4. Cities of brick, laterite and sandstone. So this chapter leaves us not at a single temple, but within a broad urban world still quietly under construction in the mind. Roads lead onward, workshops continue their measured rhythm, and stone keeps receiving meaning from careful human hands. In Angkor, architecture became the language of kingship, devotion, and endurance. And beneath the vastness of it all rests something simple, patience repeated over generations. And Chapter 5. The Age of Angkor Wat. At the heart of Angkor rose its most celebrated temple, Angkor Wat, most likely commissioned in the early 12th century by King Suryavarman II. Even now, its name carries a quiet grandeur, built not as a hurried monument, but as a work of astonishing care. It gathered stone, faith, and royal ambition into one harmonious design, resting beneath the soft skies of the Khmer world. Chapter 5. The Age of Angkor Wat. The temple stands within a vast rectangle, enclosed by walls and surrounded by a broad moat. This band of water was not merely practical. It also suggested the cosmic ocean of Hindu belief, a sacred boundary between ordinary ground and a more ordered, divine realm. To cross toward the temple was to move inward, slowly and deliberately, from the world of men toward a carefully imagined. Chapter 5. The Age of Angkor Wat. From the western entrance, a long causeway leads across the moat with stately calm. Each step invites a slower rhythm. The symmetry is immediate and soothing, as if every line has been measured to settle the mind. Ahead, towers rise in layered balance, their forms recalling unopened lotus buds. They seem at once solid and weightless, rooted in the earth yet aspiring gently upward. Chapter 5. The Age of Angkor Wat. Angkor Wat is unusual among major Khmer state temples because it faces west. Scholars have long discussed the meaning of this orientation. It may connect to Vishnu, the deity with whom the temple is associated, and perhaps also to funerary symbolism. Whatever the full intention, the westward approach gives the monument a distinctive character, especially in the late day, when warm light settles across its stone with unusual tenderness. Chapter 5. The Age of Angkor Wat. As the visitor moves closer, the outer gallery begins to reveal itself. Corridors stretch in measured sequence, linking courtyard to courtyard, passage to passage. The architecture does not overwhelm through chaos or excess. Instead, it creates wonder through order. Every enclosure draws the eye inward. Every stair and threshold suggests a next layer of meaning. The temple feels less like a single building and more like a Chapter 5. The Age of Angkor Wat. Along the gallery walls, the bas-reliefs unfold in long, patient bands of carved stone. Here are scenes from epic traditions, celestial beings, battles, processions, and divine events. The carvings reward stillness. Figures move across the walls with grace and discipline, each line cut by skilled hands working with remarkable precision. These reliefs were not casual decoration. They formed a sacred narrative world, surrounding worship of Chapter 5. The Age of Angkor Wat. Among the most admired carvings are the Devatas, serene female figures who stand with quiet dignity along the walls. Their jewellery, garments and headdresses are rendered with delicate attention, yet their expressions remain composed and inward. They do not rush the eye. They invite it to pause. In the soft patience of their presence, the stone seems almost to breathe, preserving a calm that has outlasted centuries of weather. Chapter 5. The Age of Angkor Wat. One of the great visual rhythms of Angkor Wat lies in its towers. 5 central towers rise in quincunx formation, with 1 at the centre and 4 around it. This arrangement evokes Mount Meru. The cosmic mountain of Hindu cosmology. In Khmer hands, this ancient idea became architecture of extraordinary clarity. The temple was not only a royal foundation, it was also a model of the universe, translated into laterite. Chapter 5. The Age of Angkor Wat. The upward movement of the temple is carefully controlled. Lower galleries give way to higher terraces, and broad spaces narrow into more elevated sanctuaries. This progression matters. It reflects a world in which spiritual power and sacred order were approached by degrees. The climb was physical, but it was also symbolic. To rise within Angkor Wat was to move toward a centre, where kingship, devotion, and cosmic alignment met in an almost. Chapter 5. The Age of Angkor Wat. Suryavarman II, the king most often credited with commissioning Angkor Wat, ruled during the first half of the 12th century. His reign appears to have been energetic and ambitious, marked by warfare, diplomacy, and state building. In Angkor Wat, that power took enduring form. The temple proclaimed royal legitimacy, but it did so through sacred architecture. Authority here was not expressed only in force. Chapter 5. The Age of Angkor Wat. The temple was dedicated to Vishnu, one of the principal deities of Hindu tradition. This matters because many earlier Khmer state temples were associated more strongly with Shiva. Angkor Wat therefore reflects both continuity and change within the religious life of the empire. Its imagery, orientation, and ceremonial role all belong to this context. It was a place of worship. Chapter 5. The Age of Angkor Wat. Yet Angkor Wat should not be imagined as distant from daily labour. Behind its elegance stood enormous human effort. Quarrying, transporting, carving, planning and organising all required time, skill and administration on a vast scale. The temple's serenity can make its making seem effortless, but it was anything but that. Its calm exterior was achieved through discipline, coordination. Chapter 5. The Age of Angkor Wat. The sandstone surfaces catch light in endlessly changing ways. At dawn they can appear cool and pale. By afternoon they warm into honeyed tones. In shadow, corridors deepen into a restful grey, while sunlit edges sharpen columns, doorways and carved patterns. This responsiveness to light is part of the temple's quiet power. Angkor Wat is not static. Across the day. Chapter 5. The Age of Angkor Wat. The axial symmetry of Angkor Wat is one of its most striking qualities. Paths align with gateways, courtyards mirror one another, and the central sanctuary anchors the whole composition with serene certainty. Such precision is not cold. It creates reassurance. The mind understands, even before it explains, that this place was designed according to a firm and meaningful order. Balance becomes a kind of atmosphere, Surrounding the Chapter 5, the age of Angkor Wat. Around the central structures, libraries, courtyards, terraces and stairways are set in carefully related positions. Nothing feels accidental. The temple unfolds like a measured sentence, each part supporting the next. Even open space has purpose. It allows the towers to breathe against the sky and gives the approach its sense of ceremony. Angkor Wat teaches grandeur through restraint, letting repetition, portion and patience do much of the work of wonder. Chapter 5. The Age of Angkor Wat. The bas-reliefs also carry historical value, especially the scenes showing royal processions and military order. These carvings offer glimpses of dress, weapons, rank and ceremony in the Khmer world. Though idealized, they remain precious records. They remind us that Angkor Wat during the eternal and the earthly. Mythological scenes share space with images of power and action, linking divine pattern to the king's presence within history and governance. Chapter 5. The Age of Angkor Wat. For all its symbolic richness, Angkor Wat is first and last a masterpiece of Khmer architecture. Its builders understood proportion with remarkable subtlety. They knew how to guide movement, frame distance, and shape expectation. They understood when to open space and when to compress it. The result is not only impressive, it is deeply composed. The temple seems to know the pace at when to compress it. The result is not only impressive, it is deep. Chapter 5. The Age of Angkor Wat. Over time, Angkor Wat also became important within Buddhist practice, and this later continuity helped preserve its sacred life. The monument did not belong to one frozen moment alone. Like Angkor itself, it passed through changing centuries, yet it remained a place of reverence. This continuity is part of its story. The temple endured not simply as abandoned stone, but as a living sacred site. Chapter 5. The Age of Angkor Wat. Standing before its galleries and towers, one senses how cosmology and kingship were joined here with exceptional discipline. The king's authority, the deity's protection, and the structure of the universe were expressed together in one architectural language. This was not metaphor alone. For those who built and used Angkor Wat, such connections were real and active. Stone became a medium through which political order and sacred order could reflect one another. Chapter 5. The Age of Angkor Wat. Even the moat contributes to this profound unity. It reflects the towers in still water, doubles the monument in shimmering outline, and reinforces the sense of separation from ordinary life. Water, earth and stone are made to cooperate. The temple does not merely occupy the landscape, it completes it. The surrounding space becomes part of the experience, extending the architecture outward into reflection, silence, and the slow movement of air. Chapter 5. The Age of Angkor Wat. It is easy, from a distance, to turn Angkor Wat into legend alone, a dream in the jungle, a romantic ruin, a mystery beyond explanation. But the truth is richer and more grounded. It was planned, built, maintained, and understood by people of immense skill. Its beauty does not require exaggeration. The temple is wondrous precisely because it is real, a human achievement shaped with extraordinary devotion and intelligence. Chapter 5. The Age of Angkor Wat. In its carvings, one can feel patience. In its symmetry, confidence. In its towers, aspiration. In its towers, aspiration. In its galleries, memory. The monument gathers many moods without losing its calm. It is grand, but never frantic. Detailed, but never cluttered. Sacred, but also deeply architectural. To linger with Angkor Wat is to experience an art of balance. Chapter 5. The Age of Angkor Wat. Centuries have passed since the reign of Suryavarman II, yet the temple still speaks through line, mass and silence. It tells of a court capable of immense coordination, of artisans whose skills transformed hard stone into supple form, and of beliefs that sought to place earthly rule within a cosmic frame. Angkor Wat remains one of history's clearest examples of architecture, serving at once as worship, statecraft, and lasting cultural memory. Chapter 5. The Age of Angkor Wat. As this chapter comes gently to rest, Angkor Wat remains before us. Lotus towers above the trees, long galleries in shadow, carved stories running patiently across stone, and the broad moat holding the sky. It is not merely a monument from the past. It is a carefully ordered world, shaped by Khmer devotion and royal purpose, where cosmology, kingship and architecture were joined with Chapter 6, processions, offerings, and sacred days. At Angkor's height, the temple was never truly still. Before sunrise, soft footsteps crossed worn stone, and the first hands of the day arranged flowers, leaves, and carefully prepared offerings. Incense began to rise in thin, fragrant threads, meeting the dew air of morning. In these repeated gestures, devotion took shape, not as spectacle alone, but as daily rhythm, steady and deeply remembered by all. Chapter 6, processions, offerings, and sacred days. Priests moved through galleries and courtyards with deliberate calm, carrying objects whose meanings had been preserved through teaching, discipline, and ritual memory. Sacred spaces were approached in ordered ways, with attention to direction, sequence, and purity. Each threshold mattered. Each pause mattered. What survives now in stone was once accompanied by voices, bells, and the hush of many people who knew exactly when to step forward and when to wait. Chapter 6. Processions, offerings, and sacred days. Offerings likely reflected both wealth and season. Flowers gathered fresh, rice prepared with care, fruit, fragrant resins, and vessels of water. Such gifts were not casual tokens. They were part of a relationship between human life and divine presence, between ruler and temple, village and sanctuary. To place something before an image or altar than one lifetime, and larger than any single person, between ruler and temple. Chapter 6. Processions, offerings, and sacred days. The scent of incense would have drifted slowly through enclosed chambers and open passageways alike, softening the edges of stone with memory. Smoke curls upward so briefly, yet ritual depends on such fleeting things. Flame, breath, perfume, song. These were the living elements that completed the architecture. Without them, a temple is only structure. With them, Angkor became a place of encounter, where matter and meaning were carefully. Chapter 6. Processions, offerings, and sacred days. Royal processions added another layer to ceremonial life. When a king or high dignitary approached a major temple, movement itself became part of the message. Orderly lines, attendants, officials, parasols, and ritual objects announced rank long before a word was spoken. The carved walls of Angkor preserve scenes of such formal display, reminding us that power at the Khmer court. Chapter 6. Processions, offerings, and sacred days. For those who watch these processions pass, the experience may have been both familiar and awe-inspiring. Ceremonies repeat, yet repetition does not empty them of force. A child seeing the royal road prepared, hearing drums in the distance, or smelling incense before the first officials appeared, would have understood that an important day had arrived. Through these moments, hierarchy became visible, not abstract, but embodied in sound, distance, fabric, and motion. Chapter 6. Processions, offerings, and sacred days. Angkor's sacred calendar likely gathered people at expected intervals, shaping the year through festivals, rites, and observances tied to temple life and kingship. Not every ceremony was grand, yet each had its place. Some marked agricultural rhythms, as honoured deities, ancestors, or royal obligations. Time itself was organised through turn. When a festival came around again, it did more than fill a date. Chapter 6. Processions, offerings, and sacred days. Ordinary people were not absent from this sacred world. Though access to inner spaces was structured by rank and role, the broader life of devotion depended on many hands. Farmers, craft workers, attendants, dancers, Afenias all moved within the orbit of temple routine. Some brought offerings, some prepared supplies, some simply gathered, observed and remembered. A great ceremonial. Chapter 6. Processions, offerings, and sacred days. The inscriptions of Angkor reveal a highly organised temple economy, with personnel assigned to maintain worship, lands dedicated to support institutions, and networks of labour sustaining sacred life. Behind every visible rite stood practical preparation. Rice had to be grown, oils had to be pressed, cloth had to be woven and cleaned. Ritual serenity depended on ordinary work. The calm surface of ceremony was upheld by a vast and disciplined human foundation. Chapter 6. Processions, offerings, and sacred days. Music almost certainly accompanied important observances, though its exact sound is now lost to us. We can imagine drums marking intervals, small bells ringing, and voices rising in recitation or chant within stone enclosures that altered every echo. Sound travels differently in sacred spaces. It lingers, folds back, and becomes part of the body as much as the ear. At Angkor, ritual was heard as well as seen. measured through resonance. Chapter 6. Processions, Offerings and Sacred Days. Dancers too had a place in Khmer ceremonial culture, especially in traditions linked to court and temple. The apsaras carved across Angkor's walls are not direct snapshots of a single performance, yet they suggest how movement, ornament and divine imagery were intertwined. A dancer's hand, posture and turn could carry meaning beyond beauty alone. In ritual settings, grace was not merely decorative. Chapter 6. Processions, Offerings and Sacred Days. Light changed the experience of every rite. Morning ceremonies would have unfolded in a cool brightness, while later observances might catch longer shadows along galleries and towers. Flame from lamps could animate dark interior spaces, making gold, pigment and polished surfaces glimmer briefly. The same courtyard was never exactly the same twice. Sun, cloud, season and hour all worked quietly upon the ritual world, giving each act a slightly different atmosphere. Chapter 6. Processions, Offerings and Sacred Days. Water, so central to Angkor's wider landscape, also carried sacred meaning. Purification rites, libations and the symbolic presence of water within temple design linked earthly practice to cosmic order. To wash, sprinkle, pour or present water was to invoke renewal and balance. In a city shaped by reservoirs, moats, canals and seasonal rains, such actions would have felt especially resonant. Chapter 6. Processions, Offerings and Sacred Days. Sacred days also reinforced the bond between kingship and the divine. Khmer rulers supported temples not only as patrons of art and architecture, but as participants in a political and religious order that gave authority visible form. Ceremonial presence mattered. To appear at the right time, in the right place, amid proper ritual was to confirm legitimacy. The temple did not merely reflect power, it helped create and stabilize it in the public imagination. Chapter 6. Processions, Offerings and Sacred Days. Yet alongside grandeur, there was intimacy. Somewhere in the immense complex, an individual might bow quietly, place flowers with both hands and whisper a hope no inscription would ever record. History often preserves the monumental and the official, but devotion also lives in small motions. A careful arrangement of petals, a lit lamp, a brief moment of stillness before returning home. These too belong to Angkor. Chapter 6. Processions, Offerings and Sacred Days. The temple's carvings may have guided thought as much as decoration guided the eye. Processional routes passed scenes of gods, battles, myths and celestial beings, surrounding participants with stories as they moved. To walk through Angkor was not simply to cross space as they moved. It was to enter layers of meaning arranged in stone. Ceremony unfolded within a world already speaking, through iconography. Chapter 6. Processions, Offerings and Sacred Days. Not every sacred day would have felt identical across centuries. Angkor changed over time, and so did the religious life within it. Hindu foundations, later Buddhist transformations, and the long continuity of worship in different forms remind us that ritual landscapes adapt, yet continuity can survive within change. The path may shift, the prayers may differ, but the human need to gather, offer, remember and seek. Chapter 6. Processions, Offerings and Sacred Days. Seasonal change likely shaped attendance and mood. During the rains, the air would have felt heavier, the stone darker, the surrounding vegetation fuller and more alive. In drier months, dust and sunlight might define the approach instead. Festivals do not occur in empty time. They arrive within weather, harvest cycles, travel conditions, and the changing body of the land itself. Angkor's ceremonies belonged not to. Chapter 6. Processions, Offerings and Sacred Days. We should imagine too the moments before and after ritual, the preparations behind screens, the waiting in shaded areas, the quiet dispersal once formal acts were complete. Ceremony is not only climax, it includes anticipation and release. A vessel returned to storage, petals swept from stone, embers fading in a burner, footsteps thinning along a causeway. These endings are part of sacred life. And Chapter 6. Processions, Offerings and Sacred Days. For the people of Angkor, repeated observance would have taught belonging. To know when a festival came, where to stand, what to carry, or which gesture to make was to inherit one's place within a living order. Ritual is memory performed together. It trains the body as well as the mind. Through annual return and daily practice, sacred knowledge settled into habit, quietly shaped the identity of the city itself. Chapter 6. Processions, Offerings, and Sacred Days. The great temples now seem silent to many visitors, but silence can mislead. In their busiest centuries, these spaces were likely filled with layered sensation, chanting, smoke, textiles brushing stone, sandals on steps, birds overhead, distant water, and the murmur of assembled people. Ruins encouraged stillness, yet the past was often busy with meaning. To remember 6. Processions, offerings, and sacred days. Even hierarchy, so visible in ceremonial life, depended on shared belief and repeated participation. Rank determined proximity, privilege, and responsibility, but the system only held because thousands of people enacted it again and again. Processions, offerings, and sacred days made structure feel natural. The order of society was rehearsed in sacred space, then carried back into everyday life. In this way, ritual helped knit empire, temple, and community. Chapter 6. Processions, offerings, and sacred days. If we listen gently, the surviving stones suggest not emptiness, but recurrence. A threshold crossed many times, a stair worn by careful feet, a courtyard that once held waiting bodies beneath heat and incense. Angkor endured through repetition, through acts done properly, then done again, over months, years, and generations. The sacred was not sustained. Chapter 6. Processions, offerings, and sacred days. So as night settles around these towers in our imagination, Angkor no longer stands as a silent relic. It breathes again with priests and attendants, with offerings set in order, with processions passing and families arriving on remembered days. The temple lives through rhythm, through scent, sound, motion, and devotion repeated until memory becomes place itself. And in that gentle returning, the old city feels human, inhabited. Chapter 7. Faces in stone and the changing kingdom. In Angkor's later centuries, change came softly, like evening light settling across old reservoirs and temple towers. The kingdom did not simply break apart in a single moment. It shifted in faith, in royal priorities, and in the meanings carried by its sacred buildings. New rulers inherited an immense and mature empire, and each left traces in stone, ritual, and the careful ordering of daily life. Chapter 7. Faces in stone and the changing kingdom. Among the most striking monuments of this era stands the Bayon, at the centre of Angkor Thom. Its many carved faces look outward in quiet stillness, serene and watchful above the surrounding galleries. Scholars often connect them with Jayavarman II, the powerful king who ruled in the late 12th and early 13th centuries, during a time when Angkor's identity was being reshaped rather than abandoned. Chapter 7. Faces in stone and the changing kingdom. Jayavarman II came to power after years of conflict that had shaken the Khmer world. In 1177, Cham forces reached and sacked Angkor, a rare and deeply unsettling event in the empire's history. Later, Jayavarman VII defeated the Chams and restored Khmer authority. His reign then became one of the most ambitious building periods Angkor had ever seen, marked by recovery, organisation, and broad royal. Chapter 7. Faces in stone and the changing kingdom. Earlier kings had often expressed power through Hindu devotion, especially to Shiva or Vishnu. Under Jayavarman VII, Mahayana Buddhism received extraordinary royal support. This did not erase older beliefs all at once. Instead, Angkor's religious landscape remained layered and flexible, with older traditions continuing beside newer forms of worship. The kingdom's spiritual life, like its architecture. Chapter 7. Faces in stone and the changing kingdom. The Bayon reflects this layered world. Its plan is complex, its towers rise in clusters, and its stone faces create an atmosphere unlike that of Angkor Wat. Some see in those faces the image of Avalokiteshvara, the compassionate bodhisattva. Others note the closeness between divine compassion and royal image. Whatever the exact meaning, the monument joins kingship and spiritual care in a single, powerful architectural expression. Chapter 7. Faces in stone and the changing kingdom. The carved galleries of the Bayon also bring ordinary life into view. Here, alongside scenes of warfare and royal processions, stone records markets, boats, cooking, games, and travellers moving through the kingdom. These details matter because they remind us that Angkor was never only a place of priests and kings. It was a living city, filled with workers, families, soldiers and pilgrims whose footsteps once crossed its Chapter 7, Faces in Stone and the Changing Kingdom. Jayavarman II's vision extended beyond temples alone. Inscriptions and surviving remains point to a network of roads, bridges and rest houses spread across the empire. These routes helped bind distant regions to the royal centre, making movement easier for officials, traders, messengers and perhaps pilgrims. State power at Angkor was not only ceremonial, it also depended on connection, maintenance and the practical ability to organise stays across great distances. Chapter 7, Faces in Stone and the Changing Kingdom. The king is also associated with hospitals, known from inscriptions that describe charitable foundations. Whether we imagine them as centres of treatment, ritual care or both, they suggest a ruler presenting himself through compassion as well as authority. This public image fits the Buddhist tone of the reign. Governance at Angkor could be expressed not only in conquest and construction, but in the language of merit, healing, and moral responsibility. Chapter 7, Faces in Stone and the Changing Kingdom. Angkor Thom, the great walled city often linked with Jayavarman VII, gave this new era a monumental setting. Its gates, causeways, and faces of calm divinity announced both protection and order. Entering such a city would have been an experience of controlled symbolism. Walls defined sacred and political space, while towers and avenues directed movement inward, toward the Bayon and a heart of royal power in a kingdom. Chapter 7, Faces in Stone and the Changing Kingdom. Yet renewal did not mean simplicity. A mature empire carries weight from its own past. Existing temples remained, old elites still mattered, and regional demands did not disappear because a new king had risen. Angkor's transformation happened within structures already centuries old. That makes this period especially human. It shows adaptation under pressure, where tradition and innovation move together, sometimes in Chapter 7, Faces in Stone and the Changing Kingdom. The faces of the Bayon seem almost made for such a moment. They are steady, composed and difficult to read fully. Their half-smiles have invited wonder for generations. Perhaps that uncertainty is part of their power. They do not present one fixed message to every viewer. Instead, they hold together majesty, serenity, and mystery, allowing the monument to speak at once of divine presence. Royal Chapter 7, Faces in Stone and the Changing Kingdom. During and after Jayavarman VII's reign, Angkor continued to evolve. Mahayana Buddhist forms did not remain unchallenged forever, and over time Theravada Buddhism became increasingly important in mainland Southeast Asia. This later shift too was gradual rather than sudden. Temples were reused, images altered, and sacred meanings adjusted. The religious history of Angkor is not a neat sequence replacements, but a long Chapter 7, Faces in Stone and the Changing Kingdom. Art changed with belief, yet continuity remained visible. Builders still worked with sandstone, galleries still guided movement, and inscriptions still connected earthly kingship with cosmic order. But the emotional tone of some monuments feels different in this age. Compassion, protection, and watchfulness stand more clearly at the surface. Even where political ambition remains strong, it could be framed through gentler spiritual language, as if all Chapter 7, Faces in Stone and the Changing Kingdom. We should be careful not to imagine Angkor after Jayavarman VII as a kingdom instantly fading away. The empire still possessed labour, wealth, memory and administrative reach. Its reservoirs, temples and roots did not vanish in a single generation. But pressures were growing. Regional rivals remained active, leadership changed, and the demands of maintaining such a vast urban and ceremonial world must have been in Chapter 7, Faces in Stone and the Changing Kingdom. Environmental management also remained central to life at Angkor. Water systems had long helped sustain agriculture and support the great population around the capital. By these later centuries, maintaining canals, embankments and reservoirs would have required constant attention. Historians continue to study how climate variation, infrastructure strain and political change may have intersected. What seems clear is that Angkor's later story involves adaptation to multiple pressures rather than one simple Chapter 7, Faces in Stone and the Changing Kingdom. In the quiet stone scenes of the Bayon, war appears beside everyday motion. This pairing is revealing. Kingdoms survive not by battle alone, but by feeding cities, moving goods, honouring rituals and keeping roads open. Angkor's greatness rested on countless acts of continuity. Even in times of danger or transition, most people still had to plant rice, prepare food, carry offerings, repair tools, and wake each day beneath. Chapter 7. Faces in Stone and the Changing Kingdom. The later Khmer rulers who followed inherited more than monuments. They inherited expectations. A king at Angkor was meant to uphold cosmic balance, maintain prosperity, and express legitimacy in visible form. Temples, roads, and gifts to religionists in visible form. Temples, roads, and gifts to religion all helped perform that role. But every succession also brought uncertainty. New rulers. Chapter 7. Faces in Stone and the Changing Kingdom. If Angkor Wat had expressed one grand vision of sacred kingship in the 12th century, the Bayon offered another in the years that followed. Its crowded forms, inward turns, and many faces suggest the different centre of gravity. Here, the monument feels less singular and more layered, almost like a city of stone thoughts. It belongs to an empire reflecting on suffering, order, mercy, and power. Chapter 7. Faces in Stone and the Changing Kingdom. Visitors today often remember the faces first, yet the wider landscape matters just as much. Causeways stretched outward, rest houses marked routes, and provincial temples tied distant communities into the imperial world. Angkor's centre was never isolated from its edges. The kingdom functioned through circulation of people, tribute, labour, ideas and belief. A change in religion or royal style of Chapter 7. Faces in Stone and the Changing Kingdom. There is something deeply restful in understanding this period as transformation rather than disaster. History often sounds louder than it truly was, as if every change arrived with a single thunderclap. But many societies shift by degrees. Stones are recarved, rituals are revised, capitals continue, even as their meanings drift. At Angkor, the later centuries seem to invite that quieter view, where endurance. Chapter 7. Faces in Stone and the Changing Kingdom. Jayavarman VII remains central to this chapter because his reign gathered so many of these themes together. Recovery after invasion, monumental construction, Buddhist expression, and practical networks of rule. Yet even his extraordinary energy was part of a larger continuum. No king builds alone, and no reign stands outside history. The faces at Bayon rise from generations of accumulated skill. Chapter 7. Faces in Stone and the Changing Kingdom. As the 13th century moved onward, outside observers offered glimpses of Angkor's world. The Chinese envoy Zhou Daguan visited in the 1290s and left a valuable account of Khmer life, though from his own limited perspective. His descriptions remind us that Angkor still functioned as a major capital after Jayavarman VII. The city remained active, ceremonial and inhabited, even as deeper transitions in religion and political emphasis continued. Chapter 7. Faces in Stone and the Changing Kingdom. So when we imagine these later centuries, it helps to picture neither a vanished paradise nor a sudden ruin. Instead, think of a kingdom adjusting itself, sometimes gracefully, sometimes under strain. Towers still caught the morning light, monks still moved through sacred precincts. Officials still travelled the roads, and above them, the stone faces kept their patient gaze, watching a civilization reshape itself without entirely letting. Chapter 7. Faces in Stone and the Changing Kingdom. In that patient gaze lies the feeling of late Angkor. The empire was older now, rich with memory, still capable of grandeur, yet increasingly aware of complexity. Faith changed, art changed, and political emphasis changed with them. But life continued through those transitions, steady and real. The story of this age is not only about decline, it is about endurance, reinterpretation, and the quiet courage of a kingdom. Learning. Chapter 8. Slow shifts of water, power, and trade. By now, Angkor is not a place disappearing in a single dramatic moment. Historians instead describe a long unfolding change, stretched across generations. The great city still breathes with movement, prayer, labour, and memory. Yet around its edges, patterns are beginning to shift. Water requires constant care, political attention turns elsewhere, and wider trade routes begin quietly reshaping the world beyond the temples. Chapter 8. Slow shifts of water, power, and trade. Older stories once imagined Angkor as suddenly abandoned, as though a thriving capital simply fell silent overnight. Modern research offers a gentler, more complex picture. People did not vanish in an instant. Monks continued worship, families continued worship, and roads still linked communities together. What changed was the balance that had long supported the city, its rulers, its waterways, its regional connections. Slow shifts of water, power and trade. Angkor had always depended on careful organisation. Reservoirs, embankments, channels and moats did not manage themselves. They needed planning, repair and a steady labour force. In earlier centuries, strong royal authority could coordinate such work across a vast landscape. But when political priorities shifted over time, even a mighty system could become harder to maintain. A city built in partnership with water was vulnerable to Chapter 8. Slow shifts of water, power and trade. Scholars studying sediments, canals and tree rings suggest that environmental pressures may have added strain to Angkor's delicate balance. Seasons of intense rain could damage channels and embankments. Periods of drought could leave carefully designed systems under stress. Neither challenge alone fully explains the transformation. Yet together, they remind us that even great capitals must adapt to climate. Water, once guided so skillfully, could become more difficult to cross. Chapter 8. Slow shifts of water, power and trade. The barrays and canals around Angkor were astonishing achievements, but scale brought responsibility. A broken channel in one place could affect movement elsewhere. Silt could gather. Banks could erode. Repairs required coordination, resources and attention over many years. When historians speak of change at Angkor, they often return to this truth. Large systems do not fail all at once. They weaken unevenly, in parts, through Chapter 8. Slow shifts of water, power and trade. At the same time, power within the Khmer world did not remain fixed forever in one ceremonial centre. Courts can move, priorities can change. Rulers may favour different locations for strategic, economic or political reasons. Over time, attention gradually shifted toward regions farther south, closer to emerging maritime trade. This did not erase Angkor's importance at once. Instead, it meant that the centre of gravity slowed. Slow shifts of water, power and trade. Trade itself was changing across mainland Southeast Asia. Networks linking inland kingdoms to coastal exchange became increasingly important. Goods, ideas and influence moved along routes shaped not only by rivers and roads, but by sea winds and port cities. In such a world, capitals closer to maritime commerce could offer new advantages. Angkor, magnificent though it remained, belonged to an earlier balance between land, kingship, ritual and managed. Chapter 8. Slow shifts of water, power and trade. As trade patterns evolved, wealth and political interest could follow them. This is one reason historians are cautious about simple endings. Angkor did not merely collapse beneath jungle vines. It existed within a region that was changing around it. New opportunities appeared elsewhere. New pressures emerged at home. Over generations, these forces encouraged adaptation. The old capital became less singular, less central to rule, even while many direct. Slow shifts of water, power and trade. Religion, too, reflected continuity within change. Angkor Wat itself did not cease to be meaningful when political centres shifted. It remained a place of devotion, especially within Buddhist practice in later centuries. This matters because it softens the image of abandonment. Sacred places can outlive courts. A temple may lose one role and gain another. While royal power moved and urban patterns changed, worship and memory still held certain moderate. Slow shifts of water, power and trade. Imagine the city not as extinguished, but as slowly rearranged. Some neighbourhoods thin. Some embankments receive less repair. Certain roads carry fewer officials than before. Yet incense still rises in temple spaces. Rice is still planted in nearby fields. Children still grow into adults under the same warm rains. Transformation on this scale is subtle when lived from within. Chapter 8. Slow shifts of water, power and trade. Forest growth at the edges of Angkor should also be imagined gradually. Trees do not reclaim an empire in a single season. First come quiet absences, a path less used, a structure left unrepaired, a ditch filling with leaves. Roots test old stone patiently. Shade deepens over years. Roots test old stone patiently. Shade deepens over years. The jungle becomes. Chapter 8. Slow shifts of water, power and trade. This long view helps us respect the people who remained. Too often, dramatic histories favour endings that sound final and clean. Real lives are rarely so neat. A farmer near Angkor may have noticed changing labour demands more than grand political theory. A monk may have cared more about the next ceremony than shifting trade geography. A craft worker may simply have followed opportunity elsewhere. History moves through countless ordinary decisions, not only. Chapter 8. Slow shifts of water, power and trade. By the 15th century, Ayutthaya had become an important regional power, and conflict formed part of the wider historical setting. Yet even here, caution is needed. Military pressure matters, but it does not explain everything alone. Historians generally see Angkor's transformation as the result of several forces meeting over time. Political change, environmental strain, shifting trade, and the burdens of maintaining a vast urban landscape. Chapter 8. Slow shifts of water, power and trade. The date often associated with Ayutthaya's capture of Angkor is 1431. It remains important, but not as a single magical dividing line between life and emptiness. Events like this can accelerate ongoing transitions rather than create them from nothing. Angkor's story after that point still includes occupation, worship and memory. The city's role changed, certainly, yet the landscape did not become a blank silence. Human presence lingered within and around it. Chapter 8. Slow shifts of water, power and trade. In this way, Angkor invites us to think of decline differently. Decline need not mean instant ruin. It can mean redistribution, adaptation and uneven continuation. Monumental centres may lose political primacy while retaining ceremonial power. Infrastructure may falter in sections while local life persists nearby. Forest may advance in one zone while pilgrimage continues in another. The city becomes less a vanished world than a transformed one. Chapter 8. Slow shifts of water, power and trade. Archaeology has played an important role in revising older myths. Airborne laser scanning, mapping and ground studies have revealed the vast extent of Angkor's urban and hydraulic landscape. These discoveries help explain why change would have been complex. A settlement spread across such a broad area could not have one simple fate. Different sectors likely experienced different rhythms of use, neglect. Chapter 8. Slow shifts of water, power and trade. The more we learn, the more Angkor appears as a living system shaped by interdependence. Temples, reservoirs, rice fields, royal roads and surrounding communities all relied on one another. If courtly investment weakened, if water management became less reliable, if trade favoured other regions, then stress would ripple through the whole design. But ripples are not explosion. They move out with priorities and landscapes over years that no single whip will measure. Chapter 8. Slow shifts of water, power and trade. There is something almost tender in this slower understanding. It allows Angkor dignity. Rather than treating it as a cautionary tale ending in sudden disaster, we can see endurance within change. Stones remain. Ritual remains. Memory remains. The city's grandest age passes. Yes, but passing is not the same as erasure. Across generations, people adjusted to Chapter 8. Slow shifts of water, power and trade. Think of evening near one of the reservoirs in these later centuries. The water still reflects the sky. Voices still drift from a distance. Somewhere, a shrine still receives offerings. Yet perhaps the embankment shows wear that no one has fully repaired. Perhaps officials no longer arrive as often from the old court. Nothing in this scene demands the word collapse. Instead, it's Chapter 8. Slow shifts of water, power and trade. For listeners tonight, this matters because it asks us to rest with complexity. History is not always a gate slamming shut. Sometimes it is a river altering course, slowly, almost silently, leaving some channels active and others shallow. Angkor's transformation belongs to that quieter kind of story. The world around it changed, the systems within it strained, and still, for a long while, daily life and sacred habit. Chapter 8. Slow shifts of water, power and trade. In later centuries, travellers from beyond Cambodia continued to encounter Angkor Wat and other temples, which tells us these places were not simply unknown ruins sealed away from human sight. Their presence endured in regional memory and religious life. What changed most was not existence itself, but prominence. The ancient capital no longer commanded the same political role it once had, yet its stones, stories and sanctity remained woven in Chapter 8. Slow shifts of water, power and trade. So when we picture forest thickening around towers and galleries, we should also picture continuity beside it. Paths remain in use. Monastic routines continue. Local communities adapt to landscapes that are becoming less densely organised than before. The jungle and the human world overlap rather than replace one another in a single stroke. This overlapping is part of Angkor's quiet truth, departure and persistence sharing the same ground for a very long time. Chapter 8. Slow shifts of water, power and trade. Across generations, the old imperial capital changed from the concentrated heart of a kingdom into something more layered. Sacred monument, remembered centre, partially thinned settlement, and slowly rewooded landscape. That layered identity is more faithful than the legend of sudden disappearance. It honours the evidence and the people. It also invites patience from us. To understand Angkor, we must look at Chapter 8. Slow shifts of water, power and trade. And so we leave this chapter with a softer image of endings. Angkor was not simply lost. It was reshaped by water, labour, trade, climate, devotion and political change. The forest approached patiently and people responded in patient ways of their own. Through that long transformation, the city became something different from what it had been, not gone overnight, but carried into a quieter afterlife across the centuries. Chapter 9. When the jungle learned the paths. By slow degrees the forest moved closer to Angkor. Not in one sudden swallowing, but through seasons of rain, drifting seed, and quiet neglect. Roots explored loosened joints between stones. Moss settled into shaded cracks. Water lingered in worn courtyards where processions once passed. As royal attention shifted elsewhere, some district grew still, and the patient jungle began to memorize the old ways. Chapter 9. When the jungle learned the paths. Yet Angkor was never simply abandoned in a single breath. Angkor Wat, above all, continued in religious use, first within Hindu tradition and later as a Buddhist sanctuary. Monks, pilgrims and local communities kept certain spaces alive with prayer and footsteps. Even while some neighbourhoods, the neighbourlies, kept certain spaces alive with prayer and footsteps. Even while some neighbourhoods thinned and canals changed, memory remained anchored. Annals changed. Chapter 9. When the jungle learned the paths. In the outer reaches, silence gathered differently. Wooden houses had long since yielded to weather, leaving only traces in the earth, while stone terraces held on beneath wind and rain. Without constant clearing, leaf litter deepened along causeways. Shrubs rose near gateways. Young trees found purchase beside balustrades. The empire's great capital did not disappear in a moment. It slowly exchanged one kind of life for another. Chapter 9. When the jungle learned the paths. Imagine walking a corridor at dawn, its carved walls still cool from night air. Fine roots hang like threads near the ceiling. Drops of water gather, then fall with soft, measured taps. Beyond the doorway, a courtyard lies mottled with leaves, pale stone beneath dark stains of rain. Nothing rushes here. The place feels less empty than hushed, as if listening carefully to its own long remembrance. Chapter 9. When the jungle learned the paths. Centuries of tropical weather changed every surface. Sandstone edges rounded. Relief carvings blurred where water traced the same path over and over. Lichens spread in delicate maps across lintels and towers and towers. In shaded corners, dampness fed cushions of moss so soft they seemed to quiet even the sound of thought. The jungle was not a conqueror arriving with noise. It was a patient companion settling beside old stone. Chapter 9. When the jungle learned the paths. Rain played a steady part in this slow transformation. During the monsoon, channels overflowed, pathways slickened, and pools formed where paving had sunk. During the dry months, dust gathered over carved steps, and the scent of warm earth rose under the sun. Year after year, moisture entered cracks, roots widened them, and small changes accumulated. Time at Angkor often worked through repetition, almost too gentle. Chapter 9. When the jungle learned the paths. Some temples remained important long after political power shifted. Angkor Wat especially continued to draw devotion, and later visitors left inscriptions that remind historians its story never fully broke. Elsewhere, however, shrines became less central, their rituals fewer, their thresholds crossed less often. In this way, sacred life persisted in one place while another fell quieter nearby. Angkor became a landscape of different tempos, not a single ending. Chapter 9. When the jungle learned the paths. Along abandoned galleries, vines searched for light with delicate determination. They curled around columns, slipped over fallen blocks, and draped from roof lines like woven cords. Below them, Ants travelled in thin, dark streams, and lizards paused on sunlit stone before vanishing into shade. The great city still held motion everywhere, only changed in scale. Human ceremony had faded in many corners, but other small processions continued without witness. Chapter 9. When the jungle learned the paths. In courtyards open to the sky, leaf fall became its own calendar. Fresh green leaves dropped after storms. Dry brown ones skated along the paving in the hot season. Over years they gathered in corners, fed the soil, and welcomed new shoots into the shelter of old walls. A place once swept for kings and priests became gradually prepared for ferns, insects and saplings, each arriving with unhurried confidence. Chapter 9. When the jungle learned the paths. The faces carved on towers and pediments endured these changes with remarkable calm. Rain streaked them. Sun warmed them. Shadow crossed them in slow passage as branches thickened overhead. Though details softened, expression often remained serene, watchful, almost amused by the centuries. For a listener drifting towards sleep, it is easy to imagine that these stones were never resisting the forest at all. Chapter 9. When the jungle learned the paths. Water, once carefully guided through reservoirs, embankments and canals, no longer always moved according to human design. Some channels silted, some banks weakened. In places, stagnant pools reflected broken masonry and hanging roots. Yet water also preserved memory. It still marked the low paths, the old alignments, the engineering mind that had shaped this landscape. Even as management changed, Chapter 9. When the jungle learned the paths. There is a special quiet inside places that have known many footsteps and now hear only a few. At Angkor, that quiet would not have been empty. Birds called from high branches. Insects hummed in heat. Wind moved leaves against stone with a dry brushing sound. Somewhere, perhaps a monk still passed through a sanctuary with incense or prayer. The silence was layered, alive and full of faith. Chapter 9. When the jungle learned the paths. Travellers in later centuries did not discover a city erased from all memory. Local people knew these temples, and religious use continued in important places. What changed was prominence, maintenance, and the rhythm of habitation across the wider urban world. This distinction matters. Angkor's story is not one of simple forgetting, but of gradual recentering, where some sacred hearts kept beating while other limbs grew still beneath green cover. Chapter 9. When the jungle learned the paths. Think of stairways half lit by shafts of sun, where roots press gently under stone lips and tiny plants rise from pockets of gathered dust. Each step carries two histories at once, one made by sandals, ceremony and royal passage, the other by rainfall, shade and seed. Neither fully erases the other by rainfall, shade and seed. Neither fully erases the other. Instead, they rest together, human intention and forest. Chapter 9. When the jungle learned the paths. At doorways, carved guardians stood through all of it. Dynastic change, shifting belief, weather, and encroaching green. Their features may have softened, but their presence remained. To pass them in imagination is to feel how continuity can survive transformation. The jungle did not cancel the sacred threshold. It framed it differently. Branches leaned near. Damp air. Chapter 9. When the jungle learned the paths. The forest itself had memory of a kind. It learned where moisture gathered after rain, where seeds could root in fractured masonry, where fallen beams had enriched the soil. It followed old roads because roads opened light. It entered courtyards because walls held shade. It climbed towers because walls held shade. It climbed towers because stone offered height. In this sense, the jungle learned the path. Chapter 9. When the jungle learned the paths. Even decline can be misleading if imagined as simple collapse. For many people living in the region, life continued, just differently organized. Power moved, trade patterns shifted, capitals changed, religious practice adapted. Angkor's monumental center no longer held the same place it once had, but its stones still received light each morning, and in certain shrines devotion still gathered. History here thin. Chapter 9. When the jungle learned the paths. Picture a long gallery where apsaras still dance across the walls, though their outlines have softened under centuries of damp air. Fallen leaves collect at the base of pillars. A faint scent of wet earth rises from the floor. Outside, branches sway and brush the roof with a low whispering sound. Inside, the carvings remain, not untouched, not forgotten, but gently carried forward by the same time. Chapter 9. When the jungle learned the paths, Moss deserves its own place in this story. It is among the quietest of settlers, arriving not with force but with softness. Across steps, ledges and shaded corners, it laid a green hush over sharp angles. Under its cover, stone seemed cooler, older, more forgiving. To the wandering mind, Moss can make architecture feel almost tender, as though the temple and forest had agreed to care for one another. Chapter 9. When the jungle learned the paths. As evening rain passed and darkness gathered, water would drip from eaves and roots in patient intervals. Frogs called from low pools. The scent of leaves deepened. Tower silhouettes rose against a dim sky, familiar yet softened by the breathing forest around them. In such an hour, Angkor may have seemed less like a fallen city than a resting one. Still present, still meaningful, simply held in another kind. Chapter 9. When the jungle learned the paths. The beauty of this chapter lies in coexistence. Stone remained stone. Prayer remained prayer, where people sustained it. Forest remained forest, advancing wherever human clearing slowed. None of these truths cancels the others. Together, they form the late life of Angkor, a place neither wholly unchanged. For centuries, memory and weather shared the same courtyards, and both left their marks with equal patience. Chapter 9. When the jungle learned the paths. If you listen closely in imagination, you can hear the city teaching its final lesson before sleep takes you deeper. Great places do not always end with flames or sudden silence. Sometimes they fade by degrees, while certain lamps remain lit. Sometimes they fade by degrees, while certain lamps remain lit. Sometimes the road narrows into roots and moss, yet the sanctuary still welcomes a bowed head. Angkor's forested stillness is Chapter 9. When the jungle learned the paths. So we move slowly through vine-touched passageways and rain-darkened courts, not mourning only what receded, but noticing what endured. A temple in use, a carving still visible beneath lichen. A path remembered by local feet. A basin catching moonlit water as it did long ago. The jungle deepens, yes, but memory deepens. Chapter 9. When the jungle learned the paths. By the close of this quiet passage through Angkor, the forest no longer feels like an ending laid over history. It feels like history's later language. Green, damp, fragrant, and slow. Towers rise from foliage. Courtyards breathe beneath leaves, and sanctity lingers where voices once prayed and sometimes still do. The jungle has learned the paths, but the paths still remember the people who first walked them. Chapter 10. The last lanterns over Angkor. Evening settles softly over Angkor, and the long story begins to rest. Towers darken against a violet sky, while the reservoirs hold the last pale light. In this closing hour, the city feels neither lost nor broken, but quietly enduring. We return to its stones, waters, and sacred spaces with gratitude, letting each memory loosen into stillness as night gathers around the ancient plain. Chapter 10. The last lanterns over Angkor. Across the centuries, Angkor was more than a single temple or a vanished court. It was a living landscape shaped by kingship, labour, devotion, and careful knowledge of water. Roads, canals, embankments, shrines, and rice fields all belong to its rhythm. To remember Angkor well is to hold all these parts together. The grand and the ordinary. The carved tower and the flooded field beneath the moon. Chapter 10. The last lanterns over Angkor. The kings who ruled here raised monuments to power, merit, and cosmic order. Yet even the greatest reigns passed like seasons. Names once spoken in royal courts grew quiet, while the temples remained. In their galleries and terraces, ambition slowly changed into memory. Stone outlasted ceremony, outlasted individual lives, leaving behind a gentler kind of presence. Less command, more echo, less triumph, more continuity. Chapter 10. The last lanterns over Angkor. Angkor Wat, with its rising towers and measured symmetry, still gathers the mind into calm. Built in the early 12th century during the reign of Suryavarman II, It was first dedicated to Vishnu and later became a Buddhist site of worship. Through all these changes, the temple remained a place of return. Its form held meaning even as beliefs returned. Its form held meaning even as beliefs, rulers and surrounding worlds. Chapter 10. The Last Lanterns over Angkor. Nearby, the Bayon kept its quiet watch at the centre of Angkor Wat. Its great faces, often linked to Avalokiteshvara and perhaps to Jayavarman II himself, still look outward with composed attention. Causeways, gates and terraces once welcomed processions and petitioners. Now silence moves there more lightly. Yet the human feeling remains close. Compassion, authority, reverence and wonder, all wrapped to 10. The Last Lanterns over Angkor. Water was one of Angkor's deepest arts. Reservoirs known as barrays, along with canals and channels, helped shape both practical life and sacred imagination. They supported farming, movement and ceremony, while also reflecting ideas about balance and order. Even when systems changed over time, the memory of water remained everywhere. It lay in the geometry of earthworks and in the shine. To 10. The Last Lanterns over Angkor. To think of Angkor only as ruins is to miss the patience of its transformations. Historians understand that the city did not simply vanish in a single dramatic moment. Its political centre shifted, patterns of power changed, and some monuments were gradually left to the forest. But people continued to live, pray, farm, and travel through this landscape. Presence endured, even when imperial scale began to. Chapter 10. The Last Lanterns over Angkor. Theravada Buddhism spread widely through the region over time, and with it came changes in ritual life and patronage. Older Hindu and Mahayana Buddhist monuments were not always abandoned so much as adapted, reinterpreted, and folded into new devotional worlds. This gentle layering matters. It means Angkor was never frozen in one perfect age. It continued to breathe through altered forms of worship, care and remembrance. Chapter 10. The Last Lanterns over Angkor. The forest too became part of Angkor's afterlife. Roots pressed through masonry, leaves gathered in courtyards, and birds crossed above lintels once bright with ceremony. Yet the jungle was not merely a force of erasure. It also sheltered, softened and transformed. In the meeting of branch and sandstone, many have felt a strange peace, as if time itself were learning to grow gently over. To 10. The Last Lanterns over Angkor. Imagine now the workers, pilgrims, dancers, monks, scribes and farmers whose footsteps once stitched this world together. Most of their names are gone, but their lives remain within the city's design. Every path worn smooth, every basin lined in laterite, every threshold polished by passing feet, speaks of repeated human presence. History is not only the memory of rulers, it is also the quiet endurance of countless ordinary hands. Chapter 10. The Last Lanterns over Angkor. At twilight, ritual seems easiest to imagine. A faint bell, a thread of incense, a lantern moving beside a gallery wall. These small gestures feel at home among the vast forms. Angkor's greatness was never only in its size. It was also in its ability to hold intimacy inside immensity. A single flame beneath a towering sanctuary could still make the whole. Chapter 10. The Last Lanterns over Angkor. The silhouettes of the towers are among the most enduring in world history. Their lotus-like forms rise with both confidence and serenity, recognizably Khmer and unmistakably Angkor. Seen against sunset, they seem almost weightless, though they were raised through immense planning and labour. That contrast gives them part of their power. The heavy made graceful, the earthly made symbolic, the human effort turned towards something vast. To 10. The Last Lanterns over Angkor. Even the stones carry rhythms of rest. Long corridors guide the body into slower movement. Repeated carvings calm the eye through pattern and return. Steps lift and lower the visitor in measured sequence. These architectural choices did more than impress. They shaped feeling. Angkor taught approach, pause, ascent, and reflection through space itself, as though architecture could become a form of breathing. Chapter 10. The Last Lanterns over Angkor. Inscriptions, though incomplete, still offer glimpses of gifts, duties, land, devotion, and royal purpose. Archaeology adds traces of roads, ponds, neighbourhoods and workshops. Together, they remind us that Angkor was not an isolated marvel standing apart from life. It was woven into administration, agriculture, belief and exchange. Its beauty emerged from systems of care and effort. Chapter 10. The Last Lanterns over Angkor. There is comfort in knowing that change did not erase meaning. Capitals shifted southward, courts reorganized, and the great urban network thinned. Yet Angkor remained a sacred destination, especially Angkor Wat, which continued as a place of Buddhist worship. Pilgrims still arrived, monks still prayed, memory stayed active here, not only in scholarship centuries later, but in living practice carried quiet. Chapter 10. The Last Lanterns over Angkor. As night deepens, the reservoirs become dark mirrors. One by one, imagined lanterns gleam along embankments and near wooden halls now long vanished. Their light is modest, no brighter than a hand can shelter. Yet in that modesty there is peace. Great cities do not endure only through spectacle. Sometimes they remain through outlines, reflections, and habits of reverence. Chapter 10. The Last Lanterns over Angkor. Think of the central plain growing quiet after rain. Moist earth cools, palm leaves still. Frogs begin their patient chorus beside water channels first cut centuries ago. The monuments do not need voices to speak. Their mass, balance and placement continue to suggest intention. In silence, they tell of a civilization that understood how landscape, faith and engineering could be joined into one immense and carefully ordered 10. The Last Lanterns over Angkor. To stand with Angkor in the mind is to learn a gentler view of endings. Not all endings are sudden, and not all decline is emptiness. Some things disperse while still leaving shape behind. Some centres loosen while their meanings continue to travel. Angkor's story offers that quiet lesson, that endurance may look different from permanence, and survival may arrive through adaptation rather than stillness alone. Chapter 10. The Last Lanterns over Angkor. This is why the city lingers so deeply in memory. It joins majesty with softness, monumentality with weather, precision with mystery. The carved apsaras seem ready to move, the corridors seem ready to cool the next traveller, and the towers seem ready to receive another sunset. Angkor lives in these repeated possibilities, each one simple, each one enough to keep the past gently present in the mind. Chapter 10. The Last Lanterns over Angkor. We have followed Angkor from royal beginnings associated with Jayavarman II through centuries of expansion, temple building, hydraulic skill, and spiritual change. Now the journey rests. Nothing in this history needs to be forced into tragedy to feel profound. The city's power lies in its duration, in the way it continued through alteration, and in the way its forms still invite calm attention many centuries later. Chapter 10. The Last Lanterns over Angkor. If you let the scene settle, you can almost see the final lanterns wavering along stone terraces. Their glow touches Naga balustrades, warm steps, and the edges of still water. Above them, the towers remain dark and steady. Below them, the earth remembers every season. It is a farewell, yes, but not a disappearance. More like a last bow of light before the night fully opens around the plain. Chapter 10. The Last Lanterns over Angkor. Gratitude belongs here at the end. Gratitude for the builders who aligned sandstone into vision. Gratitude for the caretakers who kept worship alive. Gratitude for scholars, conservators, and local communities who continue to protect and interpret this inheritance. And gratitude for the city itself, for remaining legible enough, beautiful enough, and quiet enough to still welcome those who are. Chapter 10. The Last Lanterns over Angkor. Now the sky darkens fully, and Angkor becomes almost pure outline. Tower, tree, causeway, water, and night. In this reduced world, the essentials stay clear. Form remains, presence remains, memory remains. The empire changed, the rituals changed, the landscape changed, yet something recognizable endured through every shift. That enduring silhouette is the final gift. Chapter 10. The Last Lanterns over Angkor. So we leave the city in peace, not as a lost wonder swallowed by jungle, but as a place whose life unfolded across many ages and did not end all at once. The lanterns dim, the reservoirs rest, the towers keep their patient watch, and somewhere in the deep quiet of the night, Angkor remains, beautiful, altered, remembered, and still present beneath the stars.